Hello and welcome to today's session on MYOB Advanced Business 2022.2 upgrade. My name's Nick Savage Mayday, and today I'm going to be taking you through the following agenda. We're going to have a look at the new features within the finance module. Then we'll have a look at some of the enhancements and new features within CRM. We'll then have a look at what's been added to distribution. After that, I'll switch across to systems and look at the manufacturing module and some of the new elements in there. And then I'll talk about some of the additions to the system as a whole. And then lastly, we'll take a look at the mobile app and some of the enhancements made into that. So the first place I'm going to go start off with is I'm going to actually go into journal transactions. And from the latest release, we've now got the ability to actually set up approvals within journal transactions. Now, where these are set up is under the General Ledger Preferences. You have an approval tab. And within here, this is where you can actually set up the approval. So you're probably familiar with AP bills and purchase orders, for example, but now it's been extended out to include journal transactions, and we can do normal journals. We can also do reclassifications. We can do allocations. So when allocations get created, it goes through that process. And we've also got things like consolidation and trial balance as well. Now, just to show you the approval maps, which look similar to what you're presently using, and you can set up to say where we're going to actually get the field from in terms of the conditions. But one thing I wanted to mention is that there is actually a new change to reason settings for certain approvals. Now, one of these approvals in here is we can say reason for approval. So we can actually say in this case, we don't want to actually prompt for a reason. But for reason for rejection, we've actually set it up to say that's optional or it is required. So it just means that if someone is rejecting something, they have to put a reason for rejection. Now, going back to the journal itself, all that simply happens is if it's on hold, obviously there's no approval, but as soon as you remove it from hold, then you can see that it triggers and it goes through to the relevant person. And it also shows there, once we've approved it, we can then put a reason against the actual approval. And you can see the document in this case as well says pending approval, and that goes directly off to the relevant area and the relevant person to actually approve it. Now, the second thing in terms of finance is to do with the AP batch payments. And what we've actually got in here is a new kind of method that we can actually choose to use. Now, this tick box in the payment methods setup is where under the settings to use in AP, if this is ticked, it says release batch payment before export. So that's kind of the normal method that you're used to so at the moment. But if that is unticked, then it means that we can actually export the batch file first and then check it with the bank to make sure it uploads correctly, and then we can actually release it. So it gives an extra kind of level of flexibility. Now, what we found is that this may be unticked when it gets upgraded. So if that is the case, then we're going to be generating an email to notify you of this and how to change it, or get in touch with the support team. Now, what it means is that in terms of the batch payment itself, if it's unticked, then you'll have the ability to click on export prior to actually releasing it. So it just gives you that extra ability to check things out before you actually release it and apply the payment to the bill. Now, there's another feature that's been added into this screen as well, which is add payments. And add payments now allows you to go in and say, right, I want to add in any payments that we've subsequently created, but we want to include it in this batch because we don't want to create another batch for the sake of it. We can just include this payment in that batch because it's not been released. Now, this is also useful as well because we can also delete payments. So you can just use a cross to delete payments. So once they're voided, or you want to get rid of them and put them into another batch per se, then you can actually just click on that, or you can click add payments to bring things in. So those are some of the features in terms of the finance. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into the CRM side of things. So in terms of CRM, the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the marketing list, because there's been a little bit of a change in terms of the aesthetics. And what I mean by this is that firstly, this generic inquiry and shared filter is now on the main kind of header area. If you're using dynamic lists, you can select the generic inquiry, and you can also select the shared filter that then subsequently brings through the list members. Now, when you're actually adding list members, you can see in here that we can go into add, and it will flow through based on that generic inquiry. But one thing they've also added in, which makes it a little bit simpler, is you can manage subscriptions. So I could actually subscribe all, unsubscribe all, or untick certain people because they don't want to be on the actual list. And then that flows through and updates against that contact from that point of view. Now, what you can also do as well is you can convert it to being a static list. So it makes it a lot simpler. If I go convert to static list, it says, do you want to keep these members in the list after conversion? So if I say yes, I do, it'll turn it into a static list. And you can see that those two people are still in there, but they're unsubscribed. But when we actually add members to a static list, you can now see these are active. So if we wanted to add members in, we could add it via a generic inquiry, which pops up this and lets us select the generic inquiry in here. Or we can simply add it from another marketing list if we had one. Or you can even add it from a campaign. So in here, you can go through and tick the campaigns, and it'll bring through those members into that marketing list. So it just means that you can a little bit more flexible in terms of how you set up your marketing lists and how you actually push that through. Now, the next bit I want to talk about as well is marketing campaigns. So again, it's more of a change to the screen design just to make it simpler. And the first thing really is to do with this marketing lists area. So in here, it's as simple as if you want to add members in, you can just tick one of these and tick another one, for example. And then when you go to the members, you can then update the list, and that updates it based on what is selected within here. So it just makes it a little bit easier to go through and say, these are the marketing lists I have in the system, and then load them in via that side of things as well. Now, one other element that I wanted to mention about as well is that if I just go back to marketing lists and just drop out of there, you can see in here that we've got, in terms of side panels, you'll notice that there's a lot of new side panels that come into play, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on. But you can see that if I actually come out of my marketing campaign, you can see that within here, we've now got things like campaign summary. We can start to actually add dashboards in, and there's been a few new dashboards that have been added into the system. Things like campaigns, customers that are then linked to the relevant area. Now, like I said, I'll come back to that a little bit later on. Now, the next bit I want to talk about is opportunities. So in terms of opportunities, there's been a few kind of key changes, and one of the changes that has been added was that previously, if you created an opportunity and you selected a business account and you suddenly wanted to change that, you couldn't. So now you've got that ability to kind of go through and change it all the way through to the lead being, well, the opportunity being won or lost. So you can change a business account on that side of things. Interestingly as well, and this may be only for certain types of businesses, you can actually now create quotes for multiple business accounts. So say, for example, that even though that's the head business account on there, and you don't have to have a business account on an opportunity, but you can actually create different quotes for different business accounts. So like I said, it just gives that extra level of flexibility on, firstly, I've selected the wrong one, or secondly, I want to actually track an opportunity but have several quotes for different business accounts. Now, another thing to mention as well, which has been added in terms of foreign currency. So you can now actually pick foreign currency on a business account. As you can see in here, got a financial setting. You can say what currency they're going to use and also enable currency override. So in this case, you obviously can just kind of go through if that's enabled and change it to suit from that point of view. But in this case, it's just Australian dollars from that point of view. Now, one other thing in terms of opportunities and sales orders, actually, is that we now, under relations, we have a new kind of functionality to actually link opportunities and sales orders together. So previously, if you converted it across, it would actually go through and do that for you. But what you can actually see in here is that I've got a contact at the moment, but if I look at one of my opportunities that's been won, so if you look at this one here, for Nat's Coffee, you can see that under the Relations tab, it's now got the derivative from the sales order. So this is where we can actually, on the sales order, link it back to the opportunity. If we have already got the opportunity, but we haven't converted it and we wanted to tag it to say what it was originally linked to, and we can actually do this within the sales order now. So like I said, just one of those things that needed to be ironed out that previously didn't allow us to do this. We can actually go in and you can see in here now we've actually got a thing called source. And so when you select source, you can pick the type that we're going to be using, and then it'll show up as a derivative in the opportunity or the one that you've added it into from that point of view. So like I said, it's just to kind of firm up those elements that were lacking from the opportunity point of view. Now, the next thing I wanted to mention is just in terms of the mass emails. So mass emails now will allow you to actually use the templating function. And so if you're creating a mass email, you can actually pick out the source, so where you're going to pull it from, which is quite normal. And then under select template, this is where you can actually go through and say, we have moved. So this is my template that I've created, and I can choose whether to replace email content or just add to it or append to it. And you can see it just pulls it through for you and pulls everything through like that. Now, this just extends out that select template into the mass emails. But one thing to mention is that from a system point of view, if you're looking for notification templates, it's now actually called email templates. So email templates is just to kind of make it a little bit more user-friendly. And it just means that within the email templates, you just set them up as you would normally a notification template as well. Now, in terms of once we've actually sent it, just a couple of things to mention. I'm just going to send it to a certain person. So I'll just select the email address. So in terms of one other thing, when we actually go to send it, you'll notice that under the messages, if I look at the actual summary itself, there is a new kind of option within here which allows you to actually go through and process it automatically. So rather than waiting for it to run through the process and actually automate, get sent out via automation, we can now actually just go process and it just sends it automatically. And you can choose which emails just kind of skip that automation process on that part. So that's just to do with the CRM side of things. And the next bit we're going to look at is to do with the distribution area. So one new feature which has been added in, which is a very useful part, is that we have the ability to do and show inventory turnover. So there's a new area within here, and it's called Inquiries Inventory Turnover. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to pick out, start off with, which company you're going to do it for, what period you want to run this turnover for, and then you can click on Calculate Turnover, and it'll run through and work out the beginning, the ending, inventory amounts. It'll then also work out your average inventory as well, and your average inventory units for that period. And then what it'll do is it'll look at your cost of goods sold for that period range as well. And it'll essentially go through and say that we want to, from the calculation point of view, it's going to actually divide the cost of goods sold by average inventory. And then it gives you your turnover ratio and your turnover units as well from that point of view. It also shows you the quantity of items sold within that period from that point of view. Now, interestingly, lastly, it also tells you the days of sales of inventory. So it calculates based on what you've previously sold in that period, how many days it will take you to sell what you've currently got in terms of stock right now. So it's quite a useful calculation tool to figure out how you're tracking with all of your items. Now, interestingly, you can run it based on an item class. You can even add in certain inventory items. So you could even pick and choose some of your inventory items, run it, and then just track it and check it for those certain items. Now, one thing just to mention is that under inventory preferences, we've got the turnover settings. So you can even include assemblies, issues and adjustments, transfers, manufacturing from that point of view as well. So you can just incorporate that into the inventory turnover. And one other element to mention as well, you've got this managed turnover history. Now, the managed turnover history is quite useful because you can calculate the turnover or, purge the actual records, but you can run it for multiple periods between a range, and you can go through and essentially tick those and run it. And you can see that once they've been run, they then will sit recorded within the system. Now, the beauty of this is that you can potentially just add it as an automation at the end of every month or the end of every week or whatever it would be, probably period from that point of view. And then it just does it for you automatically. And then all you simply do is come into here, change the from and to period, and it will show you the turnovers for those periods. So a very, very useful tool. Now, one minor little thing in terms of sales orders. So in terms of sales orders, now you have the ability to actually set up the copy settings for your notes. Previously, this was on sales order preferences, but they've now extended it out to the sales order types. So it's now gone from the preferences and it's now housed within the individual order types from that point of view. And in terms of the sales order side of things as well, the reason I just wanted to show you within here is because I mentioned before about side panels, and they've started extending out side panels into actual screens. So it's not just side panels for generic inquiries, it's side panels within certain screens. And you can see that if I actually go into here, we've got invoices and memos. So this will actually show you any invoices for this sales order. And you can even go into customer details, which is the customer details generic inquiry screen. And it'll show you any outstanding invoices that you have for that client. So you might be in an order, and it's just giving you that ability to not have to drill through to the customer and find that information out. It's just now housed on a side panel. So like I said, there's quite a few of these that have been added into the system within the screens themselves rather than generic inquiries. Now, the next part that I'm going to jump into is to do with the manufacturing module. Now, when it comes down to the manufacturing module, there's one main feature that's been added, which is to make the bill of materials a little bit more user-friendly in terms of how we set things up. And this is called the engineering workbench. Now, the engineering workbench is actually accessible from your bill of materials screen anyway, you can go in and go Engineering Workbench, or from the menu itself, it's actually sat underneath there, Engineering Workbench. Now, the way in which it works is that you can see a visual representation of a bill of materials. Now, what that means is that you have your processes. So if I click on processes, you can see on this right-hand side all of my materials, my steps, tools, overheads, things like that. But it's actually color-coded, and you have icons based on what you're looking at. So the top bit is our processes, but you'll also see there's a blue process, which means that it's actually an outside process, and hence why it's got the little arrow next to it from that point of view. Now, underneath the main process, you can read the general material information, and you'll also see, in terms of material, if I look at this one here, in terms of my materials here, you can see there's actually a sub-assembly, that wheel, and you can see that anything that's got like a filled box, that is actually the sub-assembly with the process for that sub-assembly, and subsequently the items as well. So you can see it in a more visual format. Now, how you actually add things is you can go and say, I want to add a child, which adds a process. If you're on a process, you can go add a sibling, so add an extra process, or add a material. Or if you're on a material, you can go add a sibling, and again, you can delete things as well. And the beauty of this as well is if you want to drag certain things, you can actually drag them and reorder them, or you can drag processes and reorder them from this screen. But obviously it has to be in hold mode to be able to actually do this. But it's quite a useful feature. I think you'll all agree. Now, in terms of another feature in the manufacturing is we've added in the exceed quantity for operations and orders. So these two elements are essentially allowing us to say that if we do a move or a labor move, then we can actually say, are we allowed to increase the amount of the product that we're making during a process? So during that operation, those different steps, are we allowed to exceed the quantity? If we're not allowed to do that, then we can actually put it as a blocker, do not allow, or warn. But if we're doing, we've blocked it for the operation, so we can't increase through the operation, but we can actually allow it when we complete the order itself. So again, you've got that level of control within there. And one other thing, just in terms of preferences, is that we now have the ability to put bill of materials on hold as soon as you start creating them. So those new revisions just go on hold automatically. And it's just to tidy that up and make it a bit simpler. So when you're doing your engineering change orders and change requests, you can just flow it through from that point of view. Now, in terms of the scheduling side of things, there's been a new element that's been added in, and that is that we can now, from a warehouse point of view, we can actually set up under the manufacturing tab to say that when we transfer from a warehouse, then it's going to take a certain amount of days. Now, this is something, again, that was lacking in terms of from a MRP side of things. It wouldn't bring this into play. It wouldn't factor it into when you're actually making something. So you can actually set up in here, say this is transfer lead time from the main warehouse to the service warehouse. And then subsequently, you can set this up. So if we've got a transfer to the main, and we look at the warehouses here and look under service, you can see that this flows through. So from a replenishment point of view, we've got a transfer replenishment class. And in terms of the manufacturing tab, it knows that for this item, it's going to take 2 days to transfer that item across if we're moving it from the main warehouse to the service warehouse. This just kind of incorporates it in from an MRP point of view to say, once we do a production order, we need to backdate it because of this transfer order. So again, it's just more of a tidy up to make sure. Now, whilst I'm in here as well, I mentioned previously that side panels are a bit more inherent, and in stock items is a prime example. We now have the ability to actually go through and look at things like inventory summary. We can look at inventory allocations. We can look at things like the transaction history. And this just allows us to, instead of going to the top and clicking on the inquiries, we now just have them there on that right-hand side, and we can just open it up and view them a lot quicker. So again, it's all about usability from those side panels that have been added in. And you'll find that these side panels are in a lot of different places, so sales orders, purchase orders, customers, for example, suppliers, and the stock item screen that we're actually looking at. Now, one thing just to mention as well, you probably noticed through the presentation, if I hover over a field, we've now got a new way of actually looking at the help. And this is something that can be activated or deactivated, based on your own preference. And all it simply means is if I go into here and pick out a field, so say, for example, valuation method, it brings up a little box, and I can even click on more, and it'll give me on this right-hand side, it'll link me to here, and I can go into the actual more detail to do with the valuation method. Now, where this is housed is under my profile, and you can simply just go into here and click on info tip setting, and you've got hover over to show, or the normal, which is Control Alt click to show. So you can set that up from that point of view. Now, the last element that I'm going to go through today is to do with the mobile app. So in terms of the mobile app, there's a couple of new features which just allow you to kind of change the look and feel of things to suit yourself. And this kind of extends from the last version. Down the bottom, you can see we've got the edit main screen, and we can actually go in and say, right, I want KPIs to be removed. I want my favorites to actually go above recently visited, and also I want to move my workspaces above there as well. Now, once I go back, it updates itself, and you can see at the top that we've got our workspaces at the top from that point of view. Now, you can also, if you want to, I can go through and say, well, actually, I want to see my sales orders, and I want those to be next in line. And in terms of, if I go into time and expenses, I actually want my employee time cards to be higher up. So I've got my time cards and my receipts in the order that I want them to be. So you've got that control over the flow of, the different parts of the mobile app, and it just makes it a bit more friendly for the person who's actually using it. And then in terms of one other element, I can actually go through, and from a system point of view, it actually incorporates now all of the coloration that are set up for the different companies. So if I was actually looking at my Brisbane development, you can see automatically that it's turned itself into more of a green color, whereas previously we're in red. So it incorporates and brings through that coloration to actually allow you to know what company or branch you're in at that time. So like I said, quite a lot of new features that have been added in, and I've only really scraped the surface in terms of what I wanted to go through today. We do have release notes that are easily accessible, and if you need to talk to us, feel free to give our support team a call or our implementation team a call. So thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.